All right, good evening, guys. This is the evening session here at 5 o'clock for my live session. So just want to make sure you're there, or if who wants to check in, just say hello. All right, I'll say good evening. You can type on the bar here. This is my third presentation of the day. Still talking about the same stuff on the respiratory system. So good evening. We'll wait for a couple more people to join in. Projects were due today, or actually last week on Friday. So I got a lot of projects in from the last body system, and that was the digestive system. Talking about the respiratory system for today. So this is the live session, the third one I'm doing today. Was on this morning, 8:30 to 9:30, and then 1 to 2, and now 5 to 6 in this time frame here. So just waiting to see who's coming in. Okay, anybody else? Just got one person in here talking about the respiratory system for today. Oh, okay, we got somebody here. Who's this here? I got another person. Hello. Can you identify yourself there? Like your screen name there. I see your screen name says just another alien, kind of like that. So can you let me know who this is? Caroline. Hi, Caroline. How are you tonight? Doing good? Caroline, do you have any questions about the project or about the respiratory system? Okay, good. I'm glad you're doing great. Excellent. Good to hear. Good to hear. Any questions on the project and or the respiratory system? I went over it in the earlier two slides. I'll continue going over it if you don't have any more questions. Went through the body parts of, or the parts of the respiratory system and their functions and what they do in the last two podcasts. You can go back and listen to them. Or I could help answer questions that you may have at this moment right now. Any questions you may have about the respiratory system or the project? It's due Friday. Caroline, looks like I got another person in here. If somebody else wants to say hello or any questions you may have, respiratory system. Well, if you have any questions, I'm going to go ahead and start talking a little bit about the respiratory system. So, Caroline, you could just type your answer in there. I come back and check it periodically here, so I'll just be talking about, I'll see what you wrote there. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about the respiratory system, just so you have a basic understanding of what that is and its parts. Okay, and I'll explain the project too. So basically, the respiratory system is an oxygen delivery system. So what that means is the respiration system is a set of organs that allows a person to breathe and exchange oxygen and carbon dioxide throughout the body. So it's an integrated systems of organs involved in the intake and exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the body and the environment, including the nasal passages, the larynx, trachea, bronchial tubes, and lungs. And I'll go through each one of those organs in the respiratory system and what they do. So the respiratory system performs two major tasks, two of them. Um, we call the first one external respiration. What that means is it's the exchanging of air between the body and the outside environment. So when you're outside, you're breathing in the outside air, you're exchanging in. You call that external respiration. Now, internal respiration is actually bringing that oxygen to the cells, okay, and removing the carbon dioxide from there on, okay, from your lungs, okay. So that is internal respiration. Those are the two types of respiratory system performs those two major tasks: internal and external respiration. Okay, all right. Some of the parts that we're going to talk about that the respiratory system includes is the nose, the mouth, the trachea, the bronchial tubes, the lungs, and the diaphragm. Those are some of the main organs, and I mentioned some of them earlier just in the last segment there too. Okay. Any other questions? So like I said, you could type on the bottom ticker there too. All right, some functions of the respiratory system. One function of the respiratory system, it supplies the body with oxygen and dispose of carbon dioxide. And it filters inspired air brought in. And it also produces sound like our vocal cords, like our voice box when we're talking. It contains receptors for smell as well, and it rids the body of some excess water and heat, and it also helps regulate pH in the blood. So those are some functions of the respiratory system. Now, breathing is called pulmonary ventilation, and it consists of two phases. All right, when you inhale, okay, it's called inspiration, taking that breath in. All right, you draw the gases into the lung. When you exhale, you expire. The gases, the forces, the gases are coming out of the lungs. So those are the two parts: inhaling and exhaling for breathing. And the two components for breathing. All right. Okay. Excellent. All right. Um, any questions? I'm just coming back and checking out. And there's a couple people in here. Caroline, I'm assuming you're still one of them in here. Don't know who the other person is. If you want to say hello, you can as well. All right. External respiration is the air from the outside environment that enters the nose or mouth through during inspiration or inhalation. And it's composed of the nose and nasal cavity as well. Sinuses, the pharynx, which is the throat, and the larynx, which is the voice box. All parts are conducting portions of the respiratory system. So you have the nasal cavity, the throat, which is the pharynx, the nose, and the mouth, and the voice box. So those are some the parts of the external respiration before it goes into internal respiration, which goes further down into the body. So these are external, meaning they're on the outside. Okay, of the body system here. Okay, so which helps for breathing. Okay, the nose. The nose is also called the external nares. Okay, and it's divided in two halves called nasal septums. All right, your nostrils, the nasal septum. All right, and it contains sinuses where air is warmed. When you're breathing in. All right, inside your nose you have what they call cilia, which are hairs. Okay, which are responsible for filtering out foreign bodies as well. Okay, so that's what they do. All right, so the nose and nasal cavity, that's one of the main functions of the respiratory system. Now there's internal nares, okay, on the inside, and external nares, where the opening of the pharynx, where the throat is. All right, this helps provide airway for respiration, okay, your nares, meaning the nasal cavity. It moistens and warms the entering air, and it filters and cleans inspired air as well. So that's also where you resonate for speech, chambers of speech, and your vocal cords, detecting smell or detecting odors in the airstream as well. Okay, so that's what that is. All right, any other questions? Anybody else in here want to say hello? Okay. Now the pharynx, which is also called the throat, okay, it's the back part of the throat here. All right, it's a common space used for the respiratory system and digestive system. So we just got done studying the digestive system from last week. We did talk about the pharynx there, how it's an aid when you're cutting and chewing up food and mashing it around with mechanical digestion. All right, the pharynx is like behind the tongue, so when you swallow, so it's also like an airway passage as well with the throat for breathing. All right, so and that's where also the larynx, which I'll get to the next part. The larynx is below the pharynx, and that's where your voice box is. So basically, the throat is the common pathway for both air and food. So inside there's walls that are lined by mucosa, all right, which is like a mucus, all right, and it contains skeletal muscles that that are primarily used for swallowing. Remember we talked about peristalsis from the digestive system. They're the muscles that push that down onto the trachea, all right. So it's flexible and lateral, okay, and to force or swallow food into the esophagus as well, all right. So that's the pharynx. All right, moving on to the next one. Any other questions? Okay, good. I think you're the only one in here right now, Caroline. Now the pharynx has um, three sections to it. You don't have to know these. It's just kind of good to know in a way. They have the nasal pharynx, the oropharynx, and the larynxopharynx, and that's just different levels of the throat going down. You don't have to know those. I'm just talking about the throat itself as the pharynx. Those are a little bit more complex terms. All right. Another one here is the larynx, right below the pharynx, which is the voice box. Now, your voice box is a short, somewhat cylindrical airway that ends into the trachea, which we'll talk about with the trachea there too. The trachea is the tube that goes down to the stomach. Okay, all right, and well, not to the stomach, well, to the lungs for that, but for the esophagus, will lead into the stomach because the trachea and the esophagus kind of work together in that same aspect. Um, this prevents swallowed material from entering the lower digestive tract, and it conducts air into the lower respiratory tract and also produces sound, okay, in the voice box, the larynx there. So it's supported by a framework of 9 cartilage, pieces of cartilage that are held together by ligaments and muscles there too. Okay, so that's the larynx. Now, the trachea is also known as the windpipe. Okay, it's a flexible tube. Okay, called the windpipe. Okay, all right, and it extends down to the lower parts of the inferior part of the larynx. All right, and the cartilage rings reinforce the trachea walls, which remains open at all times. Now, at different levels, the trachea will become into smaller tubes, a right and left bronchi. All right, these are branches that are going to go into the lungs next. So each primary bronchus or bronchi projects laterally towards each lung. So that's where the airways are going from, bringing in that oxygen from the air through that windpipe or your trachea to the bronchi or bronchus, being plural because there's many of them. All right, and then into the lungs. Okay. Okay, looks like here, got a couple people. Another question here. All right, I'll stop for a minute here just so I can answer your question here. All right, let me see your question. I think it's Caroline. Yeah, you could do it in PowerPoint or Word for your picture, for your diagram. Yep, you could do that. You could find a picture online, but then make it your own label. Okay, so if you want to copy and paste just a diagram, or you could draw it by hand, but make sure you label it and put it in your own words of what you're doing there. Okay, I understand some people aren't the best drawing, so you could kind of do something like that, like clip art it or something like that, but then put it in your own words to use that diagram with what each function does. There's about 10 of them that I put up on Microsoft Teams. So I put it out this afternoon there too to see what to do. And there's 2 parts to the project. First is drawing the diagram and labeling the parts and what they do, and then the next part's going into a respiratory disease, and I'll talk about that later. Okay. You could do everything on one paper. Okay, you could do one side with the drawing, the other side with your research. So you could do everything on one sheet of paper, both sides, take a picture or scan it and send it to them on Microsoft Teams or email to me. Okay. All right, hopefully I answered your question there. So going back to the lungs now, we went from the bronchi, which were the tubes in the trachea, now to the lung. Now each lung is conical shaped, which means they're shaped like kind of like a cone, all right? And they have a concave base that rests on a muscular diaphragm. The diaphragm is underneath it. It's a muscle that goes up and down. We'll talk about what the diaphragm does there. Okay. The lungs are both bordered by thoracic walls, and it's supported by a rib cage. Okay, so your lungs are protected by your ribs. Okay, all right. So they're usually broad and round surfaced with thoracic wall, and they have which is called a costal surface of the lung. Okay, they call that area around the lung the pleural as well too, or the pleural cavity, and we'll talk about that as well too. But let me talk a little bit more about the lungs itself. The lung, there's a right lung and a left lung. Okay. The left lung, which is right above, like around your heart area, has two lobes. It's smaller than the right lung because of the cardial notch accommodates the heart. So that's where the heart kind of sits under. That's why it's a little bit smaller. The right lung has three lobes. Okay. They're usually oblique and they are located in the superior in the body. Due to the liver on the right side. So it's because it's a little bit bigger, has three lobes, and it kind of overlaps where the liver would be. So right lung, three lobes, left lung, two lobes, because that's where the heart sits. So that's there's some interesting facts about the lungs there. All right. All right, you got that question? Okay, then about the homework. Good job, Caroline. If you have any more, you can ask some more here. Now, the pleura, or the outer surface of each lung, and the adjacent internal thoracic wall are lined by serous membrane called the pleura. Okay, you don't really have to know the pleura, it's just this protective membrane coating. Okay, we're not going to get into too much detail on the pleural, which provides some of the fluids and stuff like that around the lung. Okay, in the lung, the pleural cavity. All right. Okay, moving on here. Some of the other things here. Now, how do the lungs work? All right, let me talk a little bit about how the lungs work. The air enters your lungs through a system of pipes called bronchi. Okay, I talked about that. Those are those stems or tree branches that look like they're going into the lungs. Then there's an organ called the alveoli. That's one that you have to know. I put that into vocabulary words as well. The alveoli are where the important work of gas exchange takes place between air and your blood. Covering the alveolus or the whole network of little blood vessels called capillaries, which we'll get into with the circulatory cardiovascular system, which will be the next unit of study then. Okay. It is important that the air in the alveoli and the blood in the capillaries are very close together, so that oxygen and carbon dioxide can move between them. All right, or diffuse. All right, so when you breathe in, air comes down the trachea through bronchi and alveoli. All right, and this fresh air has lots of oxygen in it, and some of the oxygen will travel across walls of the alveoli into the bloodstream. So traveling in opposite direction is carbon dioxide, which crosses from the blood in the capillaries into the air in the alveoli, and then is breathed out, like pushed out. In this way, when you bring into your body the oxygen you need to live and get rid of the waste products, which is carbon dioxide going out. So that's kind of how it works there. Okay. Any more questions, Caroline? I know you're in here still. Okay. All right, just kind of explaining how the lungs work. All right, so that's with the exchange with the alveoli and the bronchi, which are the air sacs inside the lungs, where the gas is exchanged within the capillary beds or the capillaries, which are vessels. And capillaries are similar to veins and arteries, which we're going to study next in the cardiovascular system, probably next week. All right, so that's where the gas exchange, carbon dioxide going out, oxygen coming in through these branches called bronchi, and then out through the alveoli where they are carbon dioxide coming back out. Okay, so the lungs are sealed with pleural membranes, like I told you, inside the chest cavity, which have pleural fluid, and that's like the covering around your rib cage and covers over your lungs. So at the bottom of the cavity is a large flat muscle I was talking about called the diaphragm. Okay, now this is a muscle that goes up and down when you breathe. So I'll talk about how that one works here next. Okay, so it's called the diaphragm. Okay, so when you breathe during inhalation, taking a breath in, you inhale, the diaphragm contracts and the rib cage rises up. So breathe in, your diaphragm rises up. This expands the volume of the chest cavity, so your cavity is starting to, like, your chest puffs out, okay? And the chest cavity is sealed, so that creates a partial vacuum inside that cavity, okay? And atmospheric pressure fills the lungs as air rushes into the breathing passages there. Okay, so that's the inhale part. So that muscle is rising up on the diaphragm and air is getting filled up. Okay, now the next part will be the exhalation. Okay, when you exhale, something else happens to the diaphragm. So often exhaling is a passive event. So when you exhale, you relax, the rib cage lowers, the diaphragm relaxes, all right, and the pressure on the chest cavity is greater than the atmospheric pressure. So air is pushed out of the lungs, all right, when you relax that part. All right, so that's what that does there. All right, okay. So those are some of the main components to the respiratory system. I want to talk about the project here next, and then if you have any more questions, you can ask. Like I said, you can ask anytime. So your assignments are on Microsoft Teams. I'll ask you a few more questions here, Caroline, as well, just as a review, just some of the things I talked about here on the respiratory system. You can also go back and listen to the other ones I've had today on some of these facts on the respiratory system, the facts, functions, how they work, what's coming in, how things are moved within with the process of breathing. Okay, but this project it'll be due on Friday. Again, you are drawing or writing the a picture of the diagram of the respiratory system, what it looks like, and labeling the parts. There's about 10 parts I put on Microsoft Teams, everything from lungs to the bronchi, the alveoli, to the mouth, the nasal cavity, the pharynx, the larynx, and some of those parts that we talked about there. So got to know them, label them. All right. And then the second part of the project, 2 parts. All right. You are going to write a paragraph, a research paragraph on the types of a respiratory illness. Okay, so I'll explain here some things I've included here. All right, you got to do a research on a respiratory illness or disease, write a paragraph about what the disease or illness does to somebody, meaning what are their symptoms, okay, some things that happen to them. Do they have shortness of breath? Do they feel tired or fatigued? Okay, that's a symptom. Those are symptoms. What kind of treatments are they needing? Do they need to see a doctor on a regular basis? Do they need a inhaler? Do they need some kind of oxygen tank or mask as well too? Um, and also, how long will it last? When maybe their life expectancy, is this something that's cured? Maybe, maybe not. Is this something that someone has to live with the rest of their lives? So include those things as well. What you came up with your respiratory illness and what it does. So explain what the illness is. Tell me their symptoms, the treatments, how long will it last, how long will someone live. So the more you can provide, probably the better that you will receive grade or receive on this. So some respiratory illnesses and diseases, in case you don't know any of them, you may have heard of some of these ones. These are some of the common ones. I put this also on Microsoft Teams, so I'm reading it right from the Teams page. So some examples of respiratory illnesses are asthma. You may know somebody in your family has asthma. That's a difficulty breathing. They might carry on like a little inhaler. Okay, they'll need to get that air for them to, if they become shortness of breath. So asthma is one. Pneumonia is another type of respiratory illness. Okay, where someone has a hard time, difficulty building because of fluids that fill up in the lungs. I had it when I was younger. I had like a type of it called walking pneumonia, and I was out of school for like a month. So it was it was a long time. You just feel tired and weak, and you have a hard time kind of breathing in a way. So yeah, I wouldn't wish that on anyone. That's a difficult one, pneumonia, and that's kind of what some of this the COVID-19 has people that have pneumonia. This is kind of one that people got to kind of watch out for. But don't do COVID-19. It's more of a virus right now, but it affects the respiratory system. So we're still getting more information on COVID-19. When we talk about viruses and bacteria at the end of the year, we could do something with COVID. But right now, this is on the body systems, on the respiratory. So those two I mentioned right there are types of respiratory illnesses. All right, and lung cancer is another one. Maybe you have someone in your family that was a smoker. Okay, smoked cigarettes all the time. All right, so that could be one that could fill up the lungs as well and damage the lungs. All right, so that could be another one there. Another one called cystic fibrosis. Cystic fibrosis is another one that is a disease there too, or illness, a respiratory illness that is type of mucus that fills up the lungs, and it's usually a person has a hard time breathing with the mucus. They usually have to have like a respiratory therapist, somebody kind of respiratory therapist, somebody helps people that have a hard time breathing to get airways, and they check the lungs and the capacity the lungs has, so they could do scopes down and scoop some of that mucus out of the lungs. So cystic fibrosis, that's a tough one. There's really no cure for that one as well, and there's some people who have it. They have to live with it, and it's a tough one there because they have to constantly be treated with getting the mucus removed from their lungs because that mucus builds up their airways there. Okay. Looks like a couple more people signed on here, so a couple people left, and I got two more. So if anyone wants to say hello or any questions that you may have, I am live right now. All right. Caroline asked, that's a good question, Caroline. I don't know. That's what everyone wants to know. Caroline asked, when do you think COVID-19 is going to end? Hopefully soon. Um, Nobody knows that question right now, Caroline. Hopefully, the within their flattened curve period, maybe the end of May, hopefully before June, go into the summer. Because remember, there's no vaccine for this illness right now. So, and again, it's compromising people that are older and less, not as healthy. But keep doing what you're doing, but also be safe out there too. If you have to get out in the general public, make sure you wear a mask or gloves or something like that. But we don't know that. We don't know the answer to that question. I don't know the answer to that question when COVID-19 is going to end. So we would like it to end as soon as possible, but we just don't know how long this is going to take. All right. But going back into that project here, if you have any more questions on the project, the asthma, pneumonia, lung cancer, cystic fibrosis, another one called emphysema. These are some other breathing illnesses. So you could choose other illnesses, but these are probably the most common ones that you probably have heard of before. So you could research other types of respiratory illnesses, but these ones are going to be your most common ones. All right. Any more questions? I only got a couple more people on here. I think Caroline and maybe one other. Any more questions on the project? The brain pop. Caroline, have you done the brain pop? Or at least have access to the brain pop? You have to log in through Clever to do that. Okay, any more questions that you may have? Caroline, let me ask you a couple if you're in here still or anybody else. What is the function of the trachea? What is the function of the trachea? What does a trachea do? I talked about that earlier on in my segment and on the past ones through today. What's the trachea do in the respiratory system? You can answer that. Just do a little review. You paid attention to some of the key points, key notes I've talked about here. What's the trachea do? What is the function of the trachea? Anybody can answer that. There's only a couple people in here. I'm assuming, Caroline, you're one of them. Anybody else? Any questions on or any questions you may have? I was asking about the trachea. If someone can give me an answer on the trachea, you're in here and you'd like to give an answer on what the trachea does. What is its function? How does it work? Paid attention in earlier segment here. Any other questions? I've presented earlier, the first like 20 minutes or so was on all the parts of the respiratory system. Talked about the project, your assignments for this week. Anything else you'd like to chat about? Caroline was asking when do you think COVID-19 is going to end? Since we're talking about respiratory illnesses, even though it's a virus, I told her I don't know when it's going to end. So hopefully it'll end sooner than later. But we'll talk about that when we study viruses towards the end of the year here. We're doing all the body systems this week is respiratory. Last week was digestive, was the first week of the body systems. Probably next week is going to be the cardiovascular or circulatory system, same thing. So we're studying one a week here, along with an assignment and video, brain pop. Anybody else in here wants to say hello or can answer what is the function of the trachea? You can type your response in there, your screen name. Caroline's the only one I've communicated with in here. Only had a few people, maybe 3 or 4 at one time in here. It looks like I only got 1 in here at the moment. Okay, looks like I got a response here, Caroline. Thank you. All right, it is the trachea is a wide, hollow tube that connects the larynx to the bronchi of the lungs. Very good, excellent job there answering that. The trachea is a wide, hollow tube. It's also known as the windpipe. Very good. What is the larynx there, Caroline? What does the larynx do? You mentioned that one in there. What is the larynx? What's the function of the larynx? What's the function of the larynx? So good job answering that, Caroline. On the trachea, what is the function of the larynx? What does the larynx do? So what is the function of the, okay. All right, looks like Caroline got an answer for that. It's tough, flexible segment of the respiratory. Okay, very good. It is in the neck, but it is also known as the voice box, okay, or the vocal cords. You're right on that. So good job. It is a flexible segment in the respiratory. It's right behind the pharynx, connecting the pharynx to the trachea and the neck. So it's in between those two. So good job. All right, you got that. And what is the bronch? You mentioned the other one, the bronchi. What does the bronchi do? Or the bronchioles. All right, that was one below the trachea. So what does that do? The bronchi, bronchi. What does that do? Can you tell me what that one does? What's the function of the bronchi? What's the function of the bronchi? Caroline, you're 2 for 2 right now. So good job. You got the trachea and you got the larynx. So what's the bronchi? See if you go 3 for 3. Okay, let's see. You got an answer here. It's the function as a passageway for air to travel from the mouth to the trachea. Very good. It actually extends from the trachea to the lungs. It's the airways that enter into the lungs. That's what it does. Okay? So good job. You got all 3 of those correct here. All right. Last one I'll ask you there, Caroline. The alveoli. All right. I'll write it down so you can see how it's spelled. So you can double check it here. All right. Look that one up. The alveoli. Give me the function of the alveoli. What does that one do? Okay, let's see what you got there. Looks like you have an answer for that one. The alveoli are an important part of the respiratory system, exchange oxygen, carbon dioxide molecules to and from the bloodstreams. Okay, looks like 2 balloons. Excellent, good job there, Caroline. You got all of them right. You got all 4 of those correct there. All right, I'll give you one more. All right, I know one more. I can say one more. That was the last one. All right, I'll write it in here. All right, look up this one here for me. Lungs. Okay, what are their main functions? That was great. That's exactly what happens to alveoli. They're the little sacs inside the lungs. That's where the gas exchange happens with the bloodstream and the capillaries of carbon dioxide and oxygen. Very good. So lungs, go ahead and find me the last one. Try to go 5 for 5 here on some of these parts. And these are some of the ones you should be labeling in your um, on your diagram. The ones I'm telling you right here, or writing them into the chat here. Okay, lungs. Let's see your answer here. Let's see if you're 5 for 5, Caroline. Here, the lungs are one of the main functions to help oxygen from air we breathe to enter the red cells or red blood cells. All right, very good, excellent. It is. There's two lobes on your left lung and three on your right. And lung, the right lung's usually a little bit bigger because your left lung is where the heart sits. Okay, and it is a spot for oxygen, and that's where that's going to release there is the gas exchange is going to take place within the lungs, and it's the largest organ in the respiratory system there as well. You have two of them, like I said, and they're conical shapes, like kind of like a cone. All right, so they're shapes as well. Good job. All right, good job there, Caroline. You answered all the vocab words that I had as a review questions for you after continuing on with this segment here on the respiratory system. Do you have any more questions for the project? You know what to do for this week for Friday? It's a two-part project, the diagram and the respiratory illness research paper, okay, along with brain pop. So two things due Friday, really. If you kind of just three things, really, too. Okay, because you can do that on one piece of paper, your research and your diagram, along with the brain pop separately. Do you have access to Clever? I'm assuming you do to do the brain pops. Don't forget those do count as grades. So if you don't do them, they're going to be put in the grade book as zeros until they are finished. Okay. So make sure you're keeping up with that. I put some grades in last week. Any other questions that you may have, you or anybody else? There's only two people in here. Caroline, you're one. Don't know who the other person is. Probably going to end the segment short just because there's only a few of you, just really one person. If you have any more questions, you may leave at any time. You've answered all my questions I had for you. You paid attention. You listened to what I had to say today, so good job. Like I said, you can go back and listen to any one of these, three of them for today. Okay, your question is non-school related, but let's see your question. Is school going to be starting again? I've heard it's going. I've heard it's not going to open up till summer break. I really don't know the answer to that question there. I do not know when school's going to start up again. They said May 1st was the last time we've heard. A lot of other states around closed the rest of the school year. We did not close the rest of the school year yet. It may happen. It may not. We have to pay attention to the news and to Duval County's homepage. But as of now, we're still May 1st, but it probably could be longer. Probably will be longer. I'm just don't mark my word on it though. All right, Caroline, if you don't have any more questions, I'm going to end this session early since you're the only one in here for this evening. And I hope you have a wonderful evening and get these projects done. You have the whole week till Friday to get them to me anytime on Friday to get this work complete. So keep checking in the morning too for homeroom. Make sure you check in at like around 8 or 9 o'clock. I do attendance around like 10:30. So if you don't turn in, I notice your name hasn't been on. I've been adding you in because you've been checking in after. So don't make. I don't want to mark you tardy or anything like that. So check in the morning with me if you remember to do so. Okay. Your question says, are we allowed to get help from friends from the project? What do you mean by that? I want to know what do you mean by that question there? Google, yeah, you can use any online resource, okay, with the respiratory system that you may have. You do have a brain pop. That's helpful and beneficial too. They explain all these parts. There's a vocab session in brain pop as well, okay? So yeah, you could use any online resource tools. Only thing I discourage you help from friends is just make sure you do your own work, not somebody else's work. That's the only thing I don't mind if you work with somebody, but make sure it's your own work that you're doing and not copied from somebody else. Okay, I would say, all right, all I needed to know about the project for now. Okay, if I answered all your questions, you may leave. I am probably going to wrap this segment up early since there's only you in here. I think one other person, if they don't have any questions, or you or them, it's time to ask right now. If not, I'll be ending my session here a little bit early. Okay, another question here. Okay, you asked when do you do live sessions and do you do them on specific times? Yeah, Monday, I do 3 on Monday. Monday 8:30 to 9:30, 1 to 2, and also 5 to 6. Okay? On Wednesdays, I just do 2. I do 8:30 to 9:30 and 1 to 2. This is my only one I do on Mondays, evening one. And I also do 5th grade, Tuesday, Thursdays. So yeah, this is the only evening session, but yeah, the morning one's 8:30 to 9:30, and 1 to 2 on Mondays and Wednesdays, like our 6th grade schedule, the one Miss Wiedemann and Mr. Curtis put out. Usually math, or science and reading are on Mondays and Wednesdays, and then math and social studies are on Tuesday, Thursday with Curtis and Cantaloupe, and then me and Wiedemann are usually Mondays. Okay. All right, good. Now you're going to do some research. You sound like you got some research already done there, Caroline. So nice job on your question and answering part tonight. So thanks for participating and paying attention. So I think you're ahead of the game here right now. So good luck on the research for the respiratory illnesses. You could always email me too. So have a good night there. So good job. Okay, so I am going to end the session here if there's no more questions. Just under 10 minutes remaining anyhow, since I've covered everything that needed to be said for today. I'll be back on Wednesday, 8:30 to 9:30 and 1 to 2, talking about the illnesses, different types of respiratory illnesses, give you guys some insight for your project there, and then kind of reviewing some of these functions on the respiratory system. So I am going to end for this evening here. So Hopefully, have a wonderful night and have a good night, guys. All right, signing off. Goodbye.